Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third event in this year's Writers Across the Curriculum Speaker Series, hosted by the Writing Center at Michigan State University. My name is Trixie Smith, and I'm the director of the Writing Center here at MSU, and I'm very glad to welcome all of you to today's event and happy to see so many with us. There are a number of people and entities to thank for making this series possible. Our College of Arts and Letters and their Engaged Pedagogy and Programming Grant, the Associate Directors of the Writing Center, Karen Morosky-Rigney and Grace Pregent, Philip Montgomery, our Assistant Director, and Orville Cayedito and Nicole Golden, our amazing professional development coordinators who are making all the magic happen with Zoom. This speaker series is the fourth grant-funded speaker series we've hosted here at the Writing Center at MSU. Each year, we've asked ourselves, what questions are urgent in our field? Where should we be learning more? Where should we be investing our energy and our attention? Over time, we've had speaker series on language justice, the work of storytelling as activism, and disability justice. This year's turn toward what MSU calls Tier 2 writing, or writing in the disciplines, was designed with the urgency we feel as Writing Center practitioners to meet the moment our students and our consultants are in today. The pandemic has changed education, it's changed educators, it's changed students, it's changed our starting lines and our points of engagement. These changes require a recursive process of coming to know who our writers are and what they need from us. Because we work with writers from all majors and departments in a writing center, this year's speaker series is meant to help us refocus our work and refine our understanding of our shared writing communities. Today's event is a participatory conversation on writers, disciplines, and writing centers. The challenges of disciplinarity are felt by actual writers and workers in the physical spaces of our writing centers. What happens when we think about concrete writers and consultants through the conceptual lens of disciplinarity? What friction may we experience or witness in writing center consultations, for example? The discomfort we may feel when consulting in an unfamiliar discipline? And how can writing center directors build meaningful staff development activities about consulting in the discipline? And how can our consultants figure it out on their own too? This workshop will feature breakouts for us to talk with one another through a guided series of interactions that address the epistemic, theoretical, and practical challenges of disciplinary discourses, which themselves are often ill-defined containers of attitudes, knowledges, dispositions, and practices. We hope these conversations inspire participants to think about how their institutional work and the site of their labor connect with people who are writing in higher education. This valuable workshop is being led by three colleagues from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. So let me introduce you to these valuable colleagues. Dan Emery is an assistant director of writing across the curriculum at the University of Minnesota. He earned his PhD in communication studies and rhetorics of inquiry at the University of Iowa, and previously served as director of the Writing Center at the University of Utah. Home of the Writing Enriched Curriculum Program, WAC at Minnesota engages with more than 100 undergraduate degree programs to promote effective and relevant writing instruction across the disciplines. Dan's research has recently appeared in the 2022 edited volume, Writing Enriched Curricula, Models of Faculty-Driven and Departmental Transformation. Katie Levin is co-director of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Center for Writing. She received her doctorate from Indiana University with a dissertation entitled More Things Than Dreamt of in Our Philosophy, Tutoring Administration and Other Peculiarities of Writing Center Work. She resists writing on her own, but she loves collaborative writing. She has collaboratively written publications in a book from WAC Clearinghouse, Praxis, and the Writing Center Journal. Her current project with Rachel Azama, Meredith Steck, and Jasmine Tang is an edited collection with the working title, The Reluctant Supervisor, Recognizing and Rethinking Power in Writing Center Supervisory Practices. Jasmine Tang is always interested in exploring what the intersection of women of color feminism and writing center studies looks like in writing consultations, supervisory practices, group facilitation, and the minutiae of administrative work. Jasmine also works at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities as co-director of the Center for Writing and the Minnesota Writing Project, and as affiliate graduate faculty member literacy and rhetorical studies. Most recently, Jasmine has the privilege of being a leader at the 2022 IWCA Summer Institute. Jasmine also applies her training to her role as the dramaturg of, is it Anika? Arts, an experimental performing arts collaborative in the Twin Cities. We are pleased to have all of them with us here today, and so now I'll turn it over to Dan, Katie, and Jasmine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Don't worry, y'all. This is not going to be an interpretive dance kind of workshop, okay? But if you want to do that, I'm down. I'm down. You let me know. All right. Well, thank you so much. Dan, Katie, and I want to thank our MSU colleagues for the invitation to be part of this speaker series. My heart is pounding. It's such a privilege to be in this space with all of you, and we're truly honored to be part of this. Thank you, Grace, Karen, Nicole, Orville, Trixie, the entire MSU team for all your behind the scenes administrative work toward this event. We know there's a lot of hours toward it. So today, my colleagues and I join you from stolen Dakota land in Minnesota, specifically the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, where we work at a land grant institution, land grab, right, that benefits from the violences instituted by the Morrill Act of 1862, among other legislative acts.
We want to start with just a couple of notes on accessibility. We've designed our talk today with accessibility in mind, and we invite you to tell us what else you might need to help you participate. If you have any trouble with audio or video, let Nicole or Orville know anything that might go wrong. Finally, we're recording in order to be able to improve access and build transcripts. If you would prefer not to be recorded, you can turn off your camera and change your Zoom name to participant.
And we'll be drawing from a few resources today. They are all in a folder, and the folder name is z.umn.edu/threescompany. That will also be in the chat, thanks to our tech hosts. All those resources are available online. It can be printed, although I will say the one thing that's not yet in that folder is a PDF of our slides. And that's my fault because I do ridiculous animation where I just add slides like a flip book, and I don't want to give you 70 billion slides. I just want to give you easy slides. So eventually those will be in there in a more readable form. And we will be doing a few activities today that are all collaborative in a number of ways. So we'll start by unpacking writing in the disciplines and writing centers. And for that, we'll be using a Jamboard. You may need to be logged into a Google account for that. Then we'll reflect on our relationships to disciplinarity. We'll do some free writing and discussion. Third, we'll talk about 6 different versions of disciplinary expectations, and that is an activity similar to what we do in our own consultant development. And then we'll wrap up by discussing the big picture and your local contexts.
All right, so as we think about disciplinarity at the Writing Center, we also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that not everyone in a writing center or in writing across the curriculum is an English major or has training in Ret Comp or even writing studies. So with that in mind, my name is Jasmine Tang. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I come to writing centers as someone who's primarily trained in American studies, specifically in critical ethnic studies and Asian American studies.
I'm Dan Emery, he, him. I show up alphabetically first, and so sometimes my name is first, and I'm really not happy about that. My home discipline is communication studies, and my area of research was history of rhetoric, but I've ended up working and writing across the curriculum roles in a number of places.
And hi, I'm Katie Levin. I use she, her pronouns. My home discipline currently, and for the last 20 years, has been writing center studies, but much of my grad school life before switching to that was Victorian Lit.
Just a note about our workshop title. As we were talking, we knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't quite know how to do it. And Three's Company became our our joke about 2 women and a guy who get together and have miscommunication. If you remember the 1980s sitcom, if you don't, that's good news too. But we hooked on to Three's Company because we're interested in the interrelationships and our own perceptions about writing center work disciplines as sort of entities of knowledge, and writing centers as physical spaces. And very much like the TV show, we're going to start with some things that all seem familiar, but it's going to get really complicated.
Okay, y'all. So we thought it'd be helpful to give a little bit of our rationale for our time together today. So as we brainstormed for our event, it became clear to us that we wanted to use our time together with you all to pose and discuss some questions. So we wanted to think of this as a workshop, as a series of interactions, not so much a talk with a Q&A at the end, though I will say we're going to reserve the last few minutes for discussion and questions if folks want to stay. So here's our primary goals today. One is truly, we want to value the wisdom, experiences, and histories of everyone here. Two, to learn and think together, to be in critical community with one another. And not like a romantic community, y'all, like a real critical community. Three, to be able to bring a more nuanced understanding of writing centers and disciplinarity back to our workplaces and local contexts. And then through all this, we also want to share that we deeply resist colorblind approaches to disciplinarity, that we cannot take racial formations out of disciplines. And then finally, I just want to say the headlines have been pretty rough. So we hope that you are not only practicing a radical militant self-care, but that your institutions and your workplaces are also participating in your retention and prioritizing your well-being. And for those of us with any institutional power, may we find creative ways to support supervisees.
Thank you, Jasmine. So with that, we're going to begin collaborative activity number 1, and we're calling this word association. This is where we'll start using a Jamboard. So you please join us there, and there'll be several ways into that Jamboard. You can scan the QR code that's on the screen. You can directly type in z.umn.edu/feb1msu. We're ahead of ourselves. Or you can find the link in the chat. And again, you may need to log into a Google account in order to access the Jamboard. So I'm just going to take another 10 seconds to make sure everyone is able to get there by looking at the screen. Okay, here we go. Oh, it says there are currently too many people viewing this file. Please try again later. There are never too many people. Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to tell you what is on the Jamboard. Can anyone see it and read it aloud? Thank you, Lucia. Or you can see it. I see your thumbs up.
I'd be happy to read it aloud. It says,
Thank you.
Sure. When you hear the words writing in disciplines and writing centers, what comes to mind?
Thank you very much, Lucia. Just take 3 minutes, just jotting. And that's, informally, we're really invoking the quickness of word association there. I was going to show y'all how to use a Jamboard, but I can't actually get into it. So I'm just going to describe that on the left, you'll see a number of icons. And if you mouse over the icons, you'll see the names of them. I think one is called sticky notes. And you can just click one of those sticky notes. It will pop up, a little pop-up for you. You can choose what color you want to write it in. Write on there. And then when you hit post or send, it will show up on the screen. And then you can literally drag it around and move it around. Dan and Jasmine, are you able to see the Jamboard?
I am,
Yep,
and I can
great
take over.
stuff is showing up.
Oh, awesome. Would you like to take over screen sharing that part, Jasmine?
I sure can.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop my share.
Yeah.
I'm seeing things like a space for writing experts, STEM, feeling my way around in the dark, genre expectations, science, first-year students, writing that isn't first-year writing. Oh, this is awesome. Yeah, this is exactly what we were hoping for, was we would get a lot of things popping up. Ooh, guesswork. That's an awesome. Oh, norms. Cool. Lots and lots of cool stuff. So as a warm-up activity, I'm really happy with this. Thanks.
Oops. Great. I'm going to come back to sharing now. Thank you, Jasmine, for sharing your screen. Oops. There we go. Continue. All right, so we are now going to move into the next activity. Now that we've surfaced some definitions and concepts, which were fantastic, I really appreciate, Jasmine, you're sharing that, so I got a chance to see it instead of just wistfully wondering what was going on. So we're now going to do some free writing and discussion. And I'm going to give you that free writing prompt. I will tell you that this is writing that you'll do for yourself, but you'll be invited to share it in a small group. And we're going to give you 5 minutes to do this writing. Here is the prompt. As a writer or worker in writing centers, what is your relationship to disciplinarity? Reading that one more time. As a writer or worker in writing centers, what is your relationship to disciplinarity? Take about 5 minutes. Okay, that is the minute. Thank you so much for writing and for doing so in a suddenly abbreviated time period. So now that you've done some writing, we're going to move to discussion, and I'm going to preview this discussion for you, and then we'll put you in breakouts. So we're going to ask that you get in a group and introduce yourselves to one another. We have a beautifully large crowd here today, and so you may not know each other. And then once you've introduced yourselves to each other, discuss anything that comes to mind, either with the Jamboard and or the writing prompt that we just did. So I'm going to ask the tech hosts to please create those breakout rooms, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
Okay, y'all. So we'd love to hear from you all now. And so here's some discussion questions. What are some things that your group learned together in terms of one's relationship to disciplinarity? And how does one's personal embodied experiences contribute to that relationship? And then what relational language did you hear? For example, affection or alienation, or it's complicated, right? And so as we come together in large group, I do have a facilitative note. And again, I'm going to sound bossy here, but I think a lot about the politics of sharing and of vulnerability in professional development spaces such as this one. And also I think about the friction that I often feel as a participant in such spaces too. So here's my bossy note. As you do any sharing with our large group, please speak from your own experience and not retell the personal experiences or the sharing of your group members. So in other words, tell your own story, not someone else's. All right, I hope I didn't just kill the conversation. Would love to hear from y'all at this point. Oh, Lucia.
Oh, thank you. This is so fun. Thanks so much for this. I just want to contribute that, when I think of disciplinarity, I think of like Foucault's disciplining and the idea that, like, these rules are meant to be broken in my like there's a way to resist them. And so all these conventions of genre, I'm thinking about how to teach students to break them and sort of like what the context of them are. Like you were saying, Jasmine, like there are racial formations of disciplines. And I think there's also disciplines are primarily historical formations, not intellectual ones. And so I was thinking that it has ties to linguistic justice in the sense that, we can say, sort of like, oh, these are the rules to follow in order to get ahead. But my sense is that that these rules are inherently oppressive and won't let anyone get ahead. So we need to attack the racism at the heart of it instead. And so anyway, my point is that I have a very conflicted relationship to disciplinarity. And I sometimes think that the rules are so problematic, and I kind of chafe at it, I guess.
Lots of head nodding there in response to what you're saying, Lucia. Thank you so much for going there. What's coming to mind, folks? Kat.
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about disciplinarity, I'm thinking about how outdated that term is. So a lot of the students that I'm working with, my own relationship to writing and disciplines is complicated and it's interdisciplinary. So when I'm working with graduate students in particular, you know, looking at different research projects that draw from different disciplines and helping students kind of navigate what it means to cross those lines, because I think that, you know, even for the undergrads that I've worked with, the questions that they're asking are often cross-disciplinary, right? I've got environmental students who are very interested in economic justice within environmental sustainability. That crosses so many disciplines. So being able to talk openly with students and then with faculty about, okay, so how are you supporting this question? You've approved these questions to go through for an undergrad thesis or for an individual paper. And I think that one of the things that I struggle with is the lack of recognition that student work is interdisciplinary, and working with faculty members sometimes who have a lot of tension around adjusting to new ways of studying, who are kind of rooted in these white supremacist ideas of what disciplines are. So for me, it's dual, right? Like supporting students in it and then educating faculty about the shifts.
Thanks so much, Kat. Monique?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Monique, and I am just thinking about being a consultant in a writing center, just to add to what Kat had mentioned about interdisciplinary. I just find it very fascinating. Like, my relationship to my own discipline has changed. Being able to work with writers from different fields of study to see how things can be expressed in different ways. So yeah, Kat, I do reinforce what you've said about when we cross lines, we can see how these interactions are different. And then Christina, if you want to talk more about similarities, Christina Aiken, sorry, that I think some of those similarities we can draw on to be able to communicate across and within our own disciplines too.
I guess I will take Monique's invitation to say more about that. I was thinking about similarities in terms of the process of writing, and where it's not that everyone has a similar process, but rather there tends to be, when I get requests for talking about disciplines, an omission of the idea of process, where I feel like whatever it is that the final product is intended to look like, there's still a process to go through in order to get to that final stage. And for me, I've learned so much about writing by learning about these other disciplinary values, but also it's reaffirmed my sense that the process behind it is the thing that I am most interested in focusing on.
Thank you. Really valuable discussion points. Thank you all so much. So I'm going to move to the next activity here as we continue exploring this topic. Katie, you're on.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, everybody, for sharing out loud and in the chat. So moving to the promised collaborative activity number 3, where we'll be looking closer to the ground at 6 versions of disciplinary expectations across curricula. In writing centers, we often encounter disciplines at the level of assignments and courses. In the writing across the curriculum context at Minnesota, we also encounter them as curricula and undergraduate degree programs, so wider scope rather than individual assignments and courses. We thought we'd talk together about what faculty say about what undergraduate students should be able to do in their own disciplines. And we thought maybe we could think about how having a window into what those faculty say, or even into the process by which we get them to those answers, can help us as writing consultants. So in this next activity, you're going to join a new team, and you're going to select 2 of the 6 descriptions of undergraduate writing abilities created through the Writing Enriched Curriculum process at Minnesota. And I'm going to let Dan explain that.
Yeah, it's my connection to WEC that has me coming along today. WEC is a faculty-driven process for developing effective writing assignments or meaningful writing assignments and effective writing instruction built in conversation with faculty members, instructors, students, and stakeholders. And we do this through a series of structured conversations. The second conversation that we have out of 4 asks this question of folks. First, we've asked them, what are features of writing in your discipline? How do we recognize it? And how do we know what it is? But we then ask, what should majors know and be able to do by the time they graduate?
So we're going to do an activity today with some of those lists of abilities, things that people should be able to know and do. And this is an activity that we do a version of with our own writing consultants. And in that point, they can choose from all 50 plus disciplines and units represented by the WEC program. And when we do this with them, we ask each of them to pick a major or department that's close to their own, or that it even is their own, sorry, and pick their own major and then pick an unfamiliar major. And then today we picked just 6 different majors. So we're reducing the ability of the ability to choose, but all of the writing, all of these are listed on our website. And so you can look at specific disciplines and departments that interest you later on. Today we've chosen just 6 groups, and you're going to decide as groups which one feels familiar and which one feels unfamiliar, and you're going to pick a pair of them. So to get this done, I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance through some instructions. So we need to go back to that shared Google folder. If you're not already there, again, that's z.umn.edu/threescompany. So to begin this conversation about disciplinary writing conventions and expectations, you'll go to that folder. And when you open that folder, you will see at the top 1 instructions for activity number 3. So that is a PDF. It's purple so that it stands out from all the other millions of PDFs that you might have. And that gives instructions for this activity, which includes having you again introduce yourselves. And here I will say that we put in a specific way of doing these introductions potentially. So a name and institution, but then Jasmine, Dan, and I, none of us is actually from Minnesota, but we've kind of been Minnesota-fied. And we recognize that in the culture here, when we do workshops, most Minnesotans are loath to step in and speak first. They'll politely wait for someone else to do it. And so to don't have a lot of time today, we're going to just say, let the alphabet be your guide. So whoever has the alphabetically first name, the first name begins closest to A, will start and then just go alphabetically from there. And so once you've introduced yourselves, follow the instructions, which involve those intros, plus as a group choosing, again, 2 disciplines, 1 familiar to you and 1 unfamiliar. So eventually you're going to have 3 PDFs open for yourselves. So you'll be reading your chosen lists and then engaging with the 3 discussion questions that are on that instruction sheet. So once again, we're going to go back into breakouts. You'll have about 19 minutes or so for this. And have a great time. See you soon.
Would love to hear from you. And I also just want to really encourage anybody who might be a student to contribute to this conversation too. Thank you.
I think it's okay for me to share something that was written in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Graham, talk.
Yeah, so I think when we're considering other disciplines and how familiar they are or not, there's often some embedded assumptions that people have, either based on their own personal experiences or what they hear from other folks. There's like a need to personify people based on which major they're in. And that can inform like who you work with, who you want to approach to solve problems with. And I think it kind of demonstrates how disciplines are really, sort of fictitious, and they kind of create barriers between people to solve complex problems.
Feel free to unmute. Go for it.
Oh, like going off of kind of what Graham was saying, I lost it. Disciplines. Yeah. So just the idea of disciplines being like exclusionary, and kind of like the balancing act between like having a discipline form and have all these like rules and expectations, and all these things. It does add a lot of like skills and things that we can learn, but also at what point do those things become like, roadblocks, right? Of like, you must have this innate knowledge or else, and like, how are we like teaching people to get to that point instead of just keeping like, that knowledge to ourselves? And along the and also with that, like, the more that I like am a tutor and the more that I help students and everything, the more I realize like kind of what we've been talking about of like how important it is that some like problems in disciplines or like writing issues, like the best answers is to bring in other like skills and other disciplines, so how do we meld those things and, make roadblocks and kind of like gatekeeping as minimal as possible?
Alexis, I love your comment in the chat if you want to share it.
Sure. I'm sorry. I'm suffering with some bronchitis. That's why I've been using the chat. But yeah, once you get really familiar with your own discipline and your own type of writing and the expectations and the values of that particular discipline, it becomes more difficult, I guess, to see that other disciplines have different values, and that comes through in the expectations of writing. Excuse me, I was telling my in our breakout room that in my role as the writing center director, I often do faculty development workshops for disciplines, across the disciplines. And one of the most interesting workshops was one where it was about identifying good academic writing and providing feedback for students on written projects. And there was such an argument. It was a good-natured argument, but there was an argument between like the mathematician, the religion professor, recreation and leisure science, a business writer. And when we were looking at a piece of writing and trying to decide if it was, quote unquote, good academic writing, everyone disagreed because every one of those disciplines had a different expectation of what should go into an introduction, right? So it was just so interesting to like sit back and just listen to them really, these different professors really pick apart and realize for themselves, oh, the way I write in this discipline isn't what's expected of everyone, all writing. And it was fun for me, and it was interesting to watch. It was really fun for them, I think, to realize what was happening. Excuse me. Thank you for letting me talk about that.
And I'm sorry for making you talk about that through your bronchitis, but it's so valuable. I think it gives us a nice transition to thinking about question 3, that when we bring faculty together to have those conversations, common descriptors start to emerge, like, oh, we want writing that's logical, or we want it professional, or we want it to be clear. And those descriptions are discipline specific. The additional thing is they're also connected to histories of domination and exclusion. So the practices that we consider good writing or clear writing are tied to racial formations, class formations, colonialism, the whole shebang. So I think that the big question, and this is the one that I hope that we'll be able to continue thinking about, is how do we assist novice writers in unpacking the meaning of discipline? So what is it that it takes to be a writer in a discipline, while also acknowledging those power relationships? I think this is we find ourselves on the horns of this dilemma, that we both want to invite students into disciplines and majors and help them build capacity. And at the same time, we also want them to be critical of that notion of disciplinarity. So I'm curious if this is a question that some of you got to, and what your thoughts were.
So our group took on the mortuary science discipline because it has such an interesting construct, right? There's this overall layer of, you know, professional standards and aligning with like you know, professional expectations, but there's not a lot of talk about understanding and incorporating cultural knowledge, being responsive to different cultures, understanding that the way that various cultures write about decedents is different. How do you then incorporate that knowledge when you're putting together a lab report, right? So there's this lack of specificity around what it means to be professional, and those things change according to, especially in grief and grieving, right? Those standards are not standards, they are cultural practices around death and dying. And to write in accordance with that, to me, seems important, but is not included on these guidelines for how to write about decedents. We've got a public facing of like media awareness, but the media outlets, like there's not even any nuance to that in terms of what is professional in one media outlet is going to look very different. So, you know, and how do we even navigate that and make those choices? But it's not put forth as these are choices students need to actively be thinking about and actively be making in response to the audience. This feels very blankety in terms of like, it's not a skill to critically think about how you're writing this. It's just to do it in like a very bland manner, it seems.
I could talk about mortuary science all day because it's such a fascinating space. And I love that you identified that, yeah, when they sort of divide writing into the clinical laboratory embalming context and into the celebration context, cultural knowledge is, yeah, it's at the forefront of the conversation about culture, but it's not in the way that they approach documenting the process of embalming, because that's the side that's the science side, right? So all of these formations end up getting sort of pushed into that space. That's an awesome observation. Thank you so much.
I was thinking about when we do faculty workshops and they're like, well, you know, they passed first year writing before they came to take my course. Why can't they write, you know, X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, nobody in first year writing taught them how to write this mortuary science report or this, you know, engineering report. That's something in your discipline that you do have to teach. And they're like, and then they do have to think about these conventions, right? And where they came from and why are we doing it this way? And I had a professor who was like, this first lab report never works. I need help with lab reports. And then we were like, well, what is the first lab? And she's like, learning to use the equipment. I'm like, well, that's not a lab. And so when she changed the assignment, her, you know, to how-to manuals and guides, and they were doing things like that to learn the equipment, then suddenly it worked. And then they moved into the lab reports where they were actually doing lab experiments and things and reporting on them, and the format worked for the process that they were going through. And so just kind of asking people to think about the why of this assignment or the why of this genre.
Mm-hmm. Yep, purpose, audience, and form, right, we know that those things cross disciplines, but purposes and audiences, they differ. And that's an important conversation. I often run into folks who talk about features of writing like clarity as though we all know what we mean by clarity, right? As though clarity means a thing. And sometimes it means you're subject and verb are close together in a sentence. That's a thing that produces clarity. Oh, I see. Yeah, Trixie mentioned flow as one of those like we know it when we see it kinds of things, but maybe we don't understand how sentence connections and transitions work. You know, don't have a grammatical or lexical or a syntactic descriptor for it. But yeah, we've been told our whole lives, you know, all of us have learned through our processes of education that there's a thing called good writing, as if it exists in the world. And even worse, a good writer. All right, I think this takes us to wrapping up for the day. So we're going to do something that it sounds like our MSU colleagues are familiar with. We're going to have a little Zoom cascade. We're going to ask a question, have everybody hold off on responding. Go ahead. So in the chat, we'll have you respond to this question briefly, but don't click the little airplane. Don't click send. That question is, what does this conversation or what you heard today mean to your institutional work and your institutional context? We'll give you about 3 minutes to write into this. We'll hit the airplane after a little countdown. And we aren't going to have a lot of time to talk about these, unfortunately, but Jasmine and Katie and I are going to hang around. So. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and submit. Awesome. I'm going to chase that waterfall. I can't resist.
Is that my cue, Dan? All right, all right. Well, that's the end of our workshop today. We want to thank our Michigan State colleagues for inviting us, and we thank each of you for coming here today in the space. And so we invite you to take a few minutes to read the Zoom chat if you'd like. We're also going to hang around until till half an hour in, 1:30 Central Time, if folks want to stay back and talk. I also realize that it can be hard to contribute to big Zoom conversations like this. I mean, I think about the many times I've written out a whole response and then I don't even press return on the Zoom chat, or my heart starts racing and I don't unmute and talk because I'm afraid to. So if you're like that, stick around and talk to us, because let us have the opportunity to learn from you and to hear your reflections. So with that, thank you all so much. Take good care of yourselves. Thank you.